Thanks, Catherine. So as she mentioned, my name is Jared Piker. I'm the threat prevention subject matter expert for the southern region of the United States for Checkpoint. And we want to talk today about going beyond the sandbox, because as we know, the focus for the last few years has been on sandboxing solutions to stop zero-day malware and prevent advanced persistent threats against targeted corporations and government organizations. But what we're seeing is that with these technologies being out for a few years or so, the attackers are finding ways around, finding bypasses and evasion techniques that successfully make the sandbox obsolete, just like the antivirus has become obsolete in some ways. So not to say that this means that you can turn off your antivirus, turn off your sandbox, but we have to go to the next step. We have to continue to innovate and create new technologies where we can go beyond and actually capture these evasion techniques. So we'll get into how Checkpoint addresses those concerns. As I mentioned, we're trying to stay ahead of evasion techniques. We're also trying to stay ahead of the most sophisticated threats, because a lot of attacks now are multi-vectored. So it's not enough to have just one simple solution. You need to have a multi-layered prevention solution in place. And then we're trying to stay ahead of user expectations. So we want to enable delivery of safe content, but we don't want to disable the business from continuing to be productive, because at the end of the day, the bottom line is how productive can you be, because that's how you make money. And then finally, we're trying to stay ahead of the enterprise architecture models by making it simple to deploy these solutions, whether you are an existing Checkpoint customer or not an existing Checkpoint customer. We've made it easy to merge these technologies and deploy them in such a way so as to add the least amount of complication. We all know that all the traditional security tools that we've dumped a lot of our money into and our time, antivirus, IPS, firewall, these are all reactive technologies. We're developing policies based on the type of traffic that we expect to see and that we trust within our network. And anything that falls outside of that, then we want to log and report on it and potentially prevent it from getting into the network. But as you see here, breaches are still happening because this traditional approach only protects from attacks that have already been seen, that we already have information on, such as in your antivirus signature database or in your IPS signature database. And one such attack that has been bypassing the traditional tools that's been in the news quite a bit recently is the dire epidemic. And this malware platform has been around, and it's in its second iteration now, and of course they've made several advances in the second iteration. But let's get a little bit into what this attack entails. So the first stage is an email blast sent, basically a spear phishing attack. And as you can see, it appears to be from some tech online company, and it was focused on VPs and upper execs at financial companies, because those people usually have a contact list of everybody in the organization. So if they can get in there, they can get the most information and they can actually spread it the quickest within an organization. So you see here this link toward the middle of the email. This link was actually pointed to google.com, but then it pulled up a search from google.com and actually had a download of a file that was, it looks like it's some sort of payment, 037y.zip. And it's generally speaking, it's named something like a wire payment or an invoice or order, something financially themed. and then it's usually copied from a file sharing site. Some of the, Box, Dropbox, maybe even OneDrive, but they have the same characteristics. So this payment theme zip file extracts to a screensaver file that is disguised as a PDF, and there's a macro running inside the PDF that actually installs a dropper file. If you're not familiar with what a dropper is actually a piece of software that installs something else, some sort of malware, to the target system. So the dropper itself may appear to be malign or benign, but in fact it does install some sort of malicious code, and it can be contained within the dropper, or the dropper may go out and pull down the malware separately. So once that malware is installed by the dropper, it's installed as a Google Update service, and then there's the spammer malware that actually uses the contacts in the victim's Outlook address book and sends internal to internal, so it's lateral movement spam with the dropper enclosed in the financially themed zip. So if they get 1 or 2 people out of 1,000 to click on it, then it's very easy to spread laterally within the company. And this malware actually contains a scraper and sometimes fake sites or server-side injections. And basically what it was designed to do was to bypass the 2-factor authentication at bank sites. So I know I use Bank of America, for instance, and when I log in with my username and password, but then I have an image that I know I'm the only one that knows this image that displays to me. If they're able to basically sit in the middle and I log in using my credentials, then they can capture that and then in turn use that to log in on the back end themselves, and then they have access to my bank account and they can make, wire transfers, whatever they want to do at that point. So I mentioned that in the new iteration there's some evasion techniques that they're using that are bypassing some of the more traditional, even sandbox-based solutions that we see out there. So first one is the SSL encrypted communication. So all communication into and out of the network that happens as a result of this malware being installed is encrypted, which means a sandbox solution that's not able to see inside SSL communication is going to be useless in detecting this dire malware. Secondly, it uses I2P, which is the Invisible Internet Project, to hide the command and control traffic. So not only is it encrypted in communication, but it's also using, it's not quite an anonymizer. It's more of an actual VPN tunnel type connection. So the way it works is that unless you are using this specific I2P browser, you can't access the nodes that are part of the transmission here. So it's very hard to track where the actual command and control traffic originated from in this case, because if you're outside of the I2P network, then you can't capture it. And then finally, the third evasion technique that Dyer's been using is a domain generator to actually bypass URL filtering. So now if you have your URL filtering or your web filtering in place, because it's using a domain generator to randomly generate a domain every time it's installed, you're never going to be able to keep up with the bad URLs with just the standard URL filtering tool. So how is Checkpoint addressing the evasion technique concerns of the modern and sophisticated APT and zero-day platforms that we're seeing out in the wild? To understand how Checkpoint is addressing this, we first need to understand how the traditional sandbox works. So most sandboxes operate based on operating system and application profile. So there's an image with a Microsoft Windows XP or Windows 7, now Windows 10, and then you'll have your Adobe Flash, you'll have your Oracle Java versions, and then your Microsoft Office versions. So these images are based on the knowledge that the end user is running that specific operating system and application. And what the sandbox is going to do is look at the registry for any changes, any outbound connections, if there's any files created, deleted, modified, and then finally any system processes that are spawned or killed or whatever in the process. These activities, generally speaking, can give you a better idea of whether an unknown file, something that doesn't have a signature and MD5 hash already, is malicious. So that's all well and good. It's been used to stop many attacks based on zero-day and unknown malware. But what happens when the attackers find ways to fool or bypass the traditional sandbox? And here's a couple of the ways they may do it. So they may not activate the malware if they detect they're running on a virtual environment, such as detecting if it's a single core. They may delay the attack without anything happening for 48 hours. No traditional sandbox is going to catch that because these new time-based detonation attacks are not based on the system clock. They're actually based on the BIOS clock, which means moving the clock forward in Windows is not going to do anything to help you detonate the malware. So we're not going to leave a sandbox virtual machine open for 48 hours, and thereby this malware is going to make it through. They may target different operating system versions and variants. You may have some networks out there still running Windows 2000 or Windows XP unpatched or different things like that. So they may attack an older operating system version where you may not have an image that's run against, or they may launch an attack against Mac OS or different variants of Linux. So a traditional operating system application-based sandbox is going to miss anything that falls outside of the little box that it fits into. And then finally, as I mentioned before, encrypted channels. So how is Checkpoint addressing this to stay ahead of the evasion techniques and the sophisticated malware platforms? We've introduced Sandblast, our zero-day protection solution, and it's a combination of multiple solutions within a single platform. And the reason that we are stepping ahead is we're catching more malware, we're providing proactive prevention instead of just detection, and then we're actually integrating these protections with the other software and hardware solutions that Checkpoint offers, as well as some third-party solutions. So what is Sandblast? As I mentioned, we do the sandboxing, just like the traditional sandboxing vendors do. We provide prevention against unknown malware, zero-day, and targeted attacks. We've added a layer to that, and I'll get into what that extra layer is, where we go beyond the application and operating system layers. And then we've also added another solution into our Sandblast protection platform known as threat extraction. And what this threat extraction does is it's delivering the safe content immediately while running the full sandboxing in the background. So what we do with that is, I'll get into it in a little bit, but we're going to strip out active content and deliver a file immediately, and then we'll go back and check to see what that content was actually intending to do, whether it was malicious or benign. So how does malware actually get into the system? Let's view the attack chain in a four-phase process. So we're going to start out with a vulnerability, maybe unpatched software or a vulnerability that hasn't been seen yet, that doesn't have a patch available for it. And then the second stage, once we've identified the vulnerability, we're going to exploit that vulnerability by bypassing built-in CPU and operating system security controls. And then once that exploit has been executed, then the attacker is going to be able to insert the shell code, which activates an embedded payload to retrieve that malware. And then finally, once the malware has been retrieved, as we saw on the Dire platform, once the dropper pulls down the actual Dire malware, then it's going to go ahead and run that malicious code. So how do we stay a step ahead in this kill chain? Well, first of all, we need to understand where the hackers play. So they play in basically three different fields that we are aware of. First of all, as I mentioned, the first phase is the vulnerability, of which there are thousands. And this is where IPS is focused. So it's focused on making sure that the protocols and the applications that an end user or a network or an organization is running match up to the standards that that application or operating system should operate within. And why this is important is because where it doesn't match up, there's generally something attempting to be exploited. So the other playground that they generally spend time in is the malware phase. And this is where a lot of, and I'll show you this, but this is where a lot of the traditional sandboxes are focusing. So they're focusing in on the malware, of which there are millions, and it's increasing by hundreds of thousands every day. So this is basically trying to find a needle in a haystack when you're focused on the actual malware. So a lot of solutions, in fact, aren't even preventing until they've been able to detect that something bad is happening and then create an antivirus signature. So you're basically taking a zero-day tool and sort of dumbing it down, making it just a glorified antivirus. So we found that by focusing on the exploit phase, of which there are only around 25 known right now, and the good part is if there's a new exploit that's developed tomorrow, we will still be able to detect it based on our CPU level threat detection capabilities, and I'll go into those in a little bit. But by focusing on this exploit phase, of which there's only a handful, instead of trying to pull a needle out of a haystack, now we're focused in on where the hackers are playing, and this is where the most advanced and sophisticated attacks are focusing their efforts in their code development, is on the exploit phase. Because anybody can go out and find a piece of malware. You can go download one anywhere you wanted to, and to use a known vulnerability or grab a known piece of malware to send out as an email blast to somebody. And most companies, most bigger organizations especially, the ones that have the most for hackers to gain financially from or competitively from, they're going to have some sort of antivirus in place, and a lot of them got to have some sort of sandboxing in place to where they're going to catch you if you're attempting to just use a known vulnerability or known malware. So I've mentioned that we are focusing on the exploit phase. Return-oriented programming is basically where we've seen most of the exploits focused over the last 2 years, and this is actually something, a report that Microsoft released themselves at RSA this year. And return-oriented programming is basically attempting to bypass built-in operating system and application security controls in order to exploit and insert shellcode and run malware. And how do they do this? So a normal CPU execution or operation, the CPU is going to make a call to a space in memory, and it's going to expect to receive a return for whatever it called for in memory. So you may see it as, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F. So a 1 through 6 procedure here. What return-oriented programming is going to attempt to do is actually hijack pieces of legitimate code, so maybe drivers that are already installed, to gain privilege escalation, and then once they have the privilege escalation, they can actually divert these calls from memory to go in whatever order they choose. And what they can do by that small activity is actually, once they have the privilege escalation, they can make a call from the CPU to space and memory where they actually have shellcode, and then they can execute that shellcode, install malware, and execute the malware. So modern processors, starting with the Intel Haswell chipset, have given us the capability to debug the CPU level instruction set. And so what we can do now is we can watch and detect these exploit techniques as they're happening within the sandbox. And so now we can go beyond the sandbox, as I mentioned earlier, and we can see these exploits, stop them in their tracks, and now we've increased our catch rate, and we've increased our catch rate. We're now detecting evasion techniques and stopping them, and we're actually shrinking the time it takes to detect a zero-day or an APT attack. And this is unique to Checkpoint. We're the only sandbox vendor that's utilizing this technology, and we do have a patent on it as well. So another thing that to mention here is that this is operating system and agnostic, or operating system and application agnostic. So this is not, as the traditional sandboxes, this is not focused in on just Windows XP, Windows 7. It doesn't matter what version or whether it's patched or not of the operating system that an end user is running, because these exploit techniques are anything that's based on the Intel x86 platform. We'll be able to detect a technique that's directed at that specific CPU, or to bypass that CPU's built-in protections. So I mentioned the next piece of it, the threat extraction. We're attempting to stay ahead of the user expectations by delivering files safely and immediately to keep the business up and running, so you don't have to wait the 3 or 4 minutes that it takes to wait on a verdict from a sandboxing solution. So we can deliver an email instantly, and then if the user wants the original file, if something was stripped out that they actually need, that's legitimate content, they can check a box, make a request, provide a justification, and then the file will be sent to the sandbox for a full emulation, and then if it's found to be benign, it'll be sent on to the end user in its original version. So threat extraction, as I mentioned, is providing immediate access. It's a preemptive protection, not a detection. So once again, traditional security tools are reactive. Now we'll be able to be proactive because we can strip out any type of exploitable content before it ever gets into the network. And then we're providing visibility into the attack attempts. So not only are we going to strip the content out, but we're going to notify the administrator that there was active content and why we pulled it out. And then once again, as I said, if the end user requests the original document, then we can provide the timestamp, and they have to provide a justification on why they needed it, and then it still goes back to the sandbox to make sure that it wasn't bad. So we're also attempting to stay ahead of the modern IT infrastructure and architectures. And how we're doing that is we're providing a very versatile deployment option with our Sandblast solution. So we have our cloud-based solution, which is easy to deploy as a basically software as a service. And then we offer the local dedicated on-premises solution. And this is for mainly for customers that have very strict privacy or regulation concerns. So PCI, HIPAA, those kinds of things. And so this is just a little bit about the architecture, how it works. So if you start with a Checkpoint gateway, files can be forwarded to the Sandblast appliance for a verdict, which is the on-premise solution, or they can also be forwarded to the cloud. And you can send files to the cloud and/or Sandblast appliance from the same gateway. So you can choose to keep documents local with sensitive information and send executables and JavaScripts and those types of objects to the cloud, so that you're not using up your precious cycles locally for that. And all of this is, the Sandblast solution is going to communicate back and forth with our threat cloud, which is our global intelligence network that's composed of information, indicators of compromise from over 100,000 customers, as well as third-party feeds that we subscribe to, and then our own internal malware research. So to get back into the deployment or architecture discussion here, these are our options. So the Checkpoint Sandblast Cloud, files are coming in from the internet. It does require a checkpoint security gateway currently. We are in early adoption for a cloud-based solution where we provide just a cloud-based mail transfer agent for Office 365. We're adding other solutions, other cloud-based email solutions later on, but starting out with Office 365. And so that at that point, there will be no checkpoint security gateway required. But as it is right now, the checkpoint security gateway will be the capture point for the emails with attachment and web downloads. And what it'll do is it will provide threat extraction capabilities, so scrub the files of active content, send them on immediately, and then forward the files on to the Sandblast Cloud for the full emulation process with the CPU level detection enabled. Another deployment scenario is our on-premise solution, as I mentioned. So if you have a checkpoint security gateway already in place, you can use that gateway to forward files to an on-premise Checkpoint Sandblast appliance. And that Sandblast appliance will do the extraction and the emulation locally, and then send the file back on to the end user. And with this solution, you can actually have your checkpoint gateway inline or on a span port. So you can, inline obviously is going to be the preferred recommended deployment because that gives you the full prevention capabilities. Span port is going to give you actually detect only capabilities. And then finally, you have your standalone deployment, and this is for customers who don't have checkpoint solution and already have a firewall in place or another gateway in place and don't want to replace that solution currently. For those customers, you can actually purchase the Sandblast appliance at a standalone deployment, place the Sandblast appliance in line or off of a span port if you only want to do detection capabilities. But once again, going back to prevent is recommended. So you'd want to put it in line as a mail transfer agent or MTA so that it captures all emails inbound before they get to the email server, and so you don't run into any timeouts where if the email server releases a file and it goes on to an appliance, 3 or 4 minutes passes while the sandboxing happens, and then the end user never receives an email. It sends back a query. The email server says it's released the email, so then it goes ahead and sends an email again. So you might run into timeouts and duplicate emails, that kind of thing. So it's recommended definitely to put it in line as a mail transfer agent. And the other benefit of that is that the email never sees, or the malicious attachment never sees 1 second on your network. You got your Sandblast appliance placed appropriately at the edge of your network before your mail server, and so malware never sees the light of day within your network. And then finally, a hybrid solution. As I mentioned before, you can have gateways at some branches sending files up to the cloud for emulation, because as we all know, time is money, and if you're capturing emails at your branch location, it may take longer to send it all the way back to the headquarters and do the emulation locally. So why not just send it directly out to the internet to our Sandblast cloud and leverage the cloud for all your branch locations, and then have your headquarters for your traffic for the people that are sitting behind the network at the headquarters. And I will mention as well that the Sandblast solution is not just the sandboxing and the threat extraction. Part of this protection platform is it's a multi-layered solution, and it's going to include the traditional antivirus. It's also going to include anti-bot capabilities. What anti-bot is we call it a post-infection protection. So in case somebody has been off net, they went out of the country on vacation, got some kind of virus, came back in, plugged their laptop back up on the network. At that point, your sandboxing solution is not able to do anything because the user is already infected. So what we do at that point is anti-bot can actually block the outbound command and control traffic to avoid further infection, either to other users within your network or to protect that user from actually sending data, sensitive data from your network out the front door. So all of this we've been talking about up to this point is network-based. So what happens at the endpoint layer? What happens if a user, as I mentioned before, is out of the country and off net? How do we protect them then? What we want to know on the endpoint is how should you respond? What was the damage when an attack actually happened? How did they get in so we can know how to stop it next time? And then who else is infected? We want to know if something does get in the front door, if it bypasses one of our traditional security tools or, heaven forbid, our sandbox solution, who else got it? And then finally, what elements were part of the attack? What files were downloaded? Where did they come from? Once those files were downloaded, what did they do? What data, if any, was exfiltrated from the network? So we've introduced our advanced threat prevention agent that runs on the endpoint. It's going to provide your additional attack vector coverage. So if a user gets a file over webmail at home, if they're checking their Gmail, they're not actually VPN'd into your corporate network, maybe they've found a way to disable their antivirus client at home, or even if they're running antivirus client at home and they get a piece of unknown malware through Gmail, how are you going to maintain control of that and actually prevent these attacks from happening? That's where the endpoint agent comes in. Getting files over USB, the same thing. If a USB is plugged in, somebody brings it into the network, we still want to be able to stop it, but at that point they're sitting behind the sandboxing solution, so you're not going to capture it at the network level. You need a way to capture it at the endpoint level. And then also handling encrypted files. Encryption, the decryption point or the termination for the encryption decryption is always going to be the endpoint. So what we can do with the endpoint agent now is we'll be able to actually see any of these communications in clear text because they'll already be decrypted once it gets to the endpoint. So this is providing two chances to detect and block. It's giving you the ability to not only block files inbound at the gateway, but also to block files at the endpoint. So if something, if the gateway were to be having an issue, something happened, you had to go into bypass, you're still going to be able to capture it at the endpoint with this endpoint agent. And then the post-infection, as I mentioned before, we're going to provide visibility and forensics, so we're going to help understand the entire attack chain. We're going to see what the damage was, so what data was exfiltrated, and then we're going to see how they actually got in. And then we're actually able to provide once again, a proactive response to this. So we're going to be able to quarantine the machine immediately and then provide remediation activities, which is going to quarantine and delete all the files within the attack. And then the other piece of it is we're actually going to be able to see what process spawned or how it actually happened at the endpoint, so we can focus in on who the offender was and what processes or what files were modified on their end user station. Whereas at the network level, we would only see the malware and what it was intending to do, but not who it was, not what it actually did if it got to the endpoint. So just kind of a visual on this threat emulation agent that I mentioned. It's using the same threat emulation or sandboxing back-end detection engine as our cloud or local appliances. And it can also send files to the on-premise appliance or to the cloud-based solution. It's going to intercept the files at the file system level versus the network level, so it gives you the additional attack vector coverage, as I mentioned. Users working from home, webmail and file downloads. And if they're VPN'd in, it can always send the files directly to the on-premise appliance as well. And then any users introducing malware through USB keys, same thing. So it can send it up to the cloud or to a local appliance. And then this is something, too, that's unique to the Endpoint Agent. This is going to help to detect and prevent lateral movement. And the reason is because your network-based solution is only capturing files as they come into the network. It's not capturing files between hosts that are sitting on the same switch or the same layer 2 network, right? It's only going to capture traffic that's passing between layer 3 hosts. So now we can, with the Endpoint Agent, we can actually see if this file found its way to other hosts. And then finally, the encrypted communication. So an encrypted zip in an email is going to be basically invisible to a network-based solution, but once it's encrypted, as it reaches the endpoint, then we can see it in clear text and block it or not block it there at that point. So just to summarize, based on the technologies, the new technologies of threat extraction and the CPU level detection, we're actually able to catch more malware than any other solution. We're resistant to evasion techniques, and then we provide early and quicker detection. We're proactive, so we're not relying on the generation of an antivirus signature to begin preventing. We can block it in line. We can capture the email before it hits the email server, and so malware spends 0 seconds on your network, and then we're providing the full visibility into the attack and the attack chain itself. And then we're integrating all this protection with all our traditional tools, so the antivirus, the anti-bot, firewall, application control, all of these things are captured together in one event correlation platform so that you can see all of your events and you can see the whole attack chain in one place instead of searching through multiple logs. That leads to a lower total cost of ownership, fewer clicks, fewer people involved in actually tracking down what's happening. And then it's also fast and flexible implementation. Because it plugs in very easily to an existing checkpoint or a non-existing checkpoint scenario, we can provide a quicker deployment and easier deployment, which saves time and money on the end. And then it provides easy integration. Something I didn't mention is this, the Endpoint Agent can actually integrate and provide information to existing antivirus clients such as Trend Micro, Symantec, and with those solutions, you can actually provide a verdict from the endpoint threat emulation, and then those antivirus clients can start to block immediately on that file. So that was all I had for the content. Let's check our time here. So we're still tracking pretty well on time. I'm going to go ahead and jump into a live demo now, if there's not any questions. So let me check here. Q&A. Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions outstanding, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into the live demo here. So what we've got with our live demo here is we're looking at a cloud-based virtual environment. We've got our attacker network, Windows 7 host that's using a web server to craft unknown malware attachments. It's going to be sent through to the Windows 7 victim that's going to get his email from his mail server here in the DMZ. Now, what we have in between is we actually have our checkpoint gateway with the Sandblast software solution, cloud-based, running. And so we're actually going to be able to capture these files as they come in, and we'll show you what it looks like and what they're trying to do. And then the other piece of it we have is our next generation smart event. This is our event correlation piece, as I mentioned. This is tying all the information from logs that come from firewalls, intrusion prevention, antivirus, antibot, and then your Sandblast solution. So let's go ahead and fire up the Windows 7 attacker. And I will mention here that what we're going to actually be using is unknown malware, and the reason it's unknown, we'll take a look at VirusTotal, which is Google's malware registry, and that is basically a collection of most of the well-known antivirus vendors, and you can plug a piece of malware in or file, any file, whether you know it's malware or not, and get a verdict back from most of the market-leading antivirus vendors. We've got our connection. Give it a second to boot up here. So the first thing I want to do is actually pick up this the file that we're going to be using. So we'll go into our malicious files directory here. Open up our resume. Now, the first thing you'll notice is while this was labeled a resume, it's popping up a CryptoLocker window as well as a command prompt that ran several things in the background. I don't know about you, but that's not something I would want to see from a resume that's coming into my network, especially as a security professional. So in the background, it appears to be just a standard CV or resume file. It looks to be, valid information. Maybe Joe doesn't even know that he's been attacked. And maybe he does. Maybe he's, malicious intent. But whatever the case, it doesn't appear to be a benign file. It doesn't appear to be just a resume file, even though it looked like that on the surface. So what I'm going to do here is actually pull up VirusTotal, and we're going to check that file. We're going to see what the antivirus vendors have to say about this file. We'll upload the file, let it run through, and we'll get a verdict from most of our antivirus vendors. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and minimize that, get the Windows 7 victim pulled up, and I'll show you a little bit about our dashboard here. Check this one again. So far, 0 out of 5 found it to be malicious, which 0 out of 7, that's not a good sign for the antivirus vendors. Give it a second to boot up. So what we're looking at here, this is the victim, and that's where we're actually going to run our admin consoles. So we'll go ahead and pull up our smart dashboard, which is where we're going to do most of our policy and configuration activities, and this will be across all solutions, firewall, antivirus, IPS, Sandblast, all of that. Give that a minute to load up. Go back and check one more time on our VirusTotal. So we're up to 41 now. So far, nobody's found this to be a malicious file, which is pretty scary if you're just thinking about, I think, 55 maybe or max. Give it one more second here. While that's happening, I'm going to go on over here, and we'll take a look at our hacker dashboard. So this is that web server I mentioned that we're actually going to use to craft our malware, unknown malware, and send it to our end user. So I'm going to choose that email, that resume document, and I'm going to pick email attachment. I'm going to send an email, and it's going to automatically generate an email with this subject: temp employee account, your resume has been accepted and waiting on your update. So if a user is expecting this, and resume.doc is a very common name I would think of, it may be very easy to get somebody to click on that with this type of subject line. So we've sent that through. Now let's go back and see the full. So it looks like we're checking it's 54 antivirus vendors, and not one of them found it to be a malicious file. So that's definitely concerning if you're just relying on an antivirus solution to provide protection for a network. So if we go back over to our victim, looks like we've got our dashboard loaded up. And I'll walk through a little bit. So each of the pages is going to have a policy section where you configure the policy for the specific. But you can see here, firewall, app control, which is your layer 7 gateway, and URL filtering, which work together in tandem. Your DLP, IPS, and then we got anti-spam, mobile access, VPN, and compliance solutions. But our focus today is going to be in the threat prevention here. So the threat prevention, and this is running in a lab environment, obviously, so our resources are limited. The gateway running fully virtual, on a virtual platform within a VMware type environment. So definitely not the horsepower you would expect to generally see on a enterprise firewall or gateway, which we do have the purpose-built hardware as well as many open server compatibilities, Dell and HP and other types of open servers that can run our gateway and or management software. So the first thing you'll notice on the policy page here, it's a very simple policy, which is in contrast to a lot of the traditional security tools, and I happen to like that. If you're looking at a firewall policy, you're going to get into a lot of complicated, you know, maybe 300, 400 rule policies where you're trying to find the needle in a haystack again. So it's very nice to see that we can create just a simple policy that would cover the whole organization. You can provide, you know, protected scopes. You can provide exceptions within these protected scopes to say, I don't want this particular network to actually have, you know, threat emulation or threat extraction run. We're going to actually log and take packet captures of any files that are captured in this solution. So that's going to allow us to go and do some further analysis if we wish to. And you'll see here in the policy with the threat emulation, it's not expanded out. I can go and pull it out here. We're preventing on-threat cloud, so we're not doing local emulation here. We're actually sending it to the cloud. And then threat extraction, we have two options here. You can either convert to PDF, so that resume.doc, we can convert it to PDF, or we can keep it as a resume.doc, strip out the active contents, and reconstruct the file and send it on. So let's actually take a look at our event tracker. I'll get to here in a minute. Our event tracker, we're going to take a look and see what happened. We will if I log in correctly. We're going to see what happened when that file was sent that we crafted earlier. These other applications, they can all be launched from a single window, but we actually have, you know, multiple applications for tracking and event correlation, and then your policy configuration, because it can get confusing if you're trying to run it all from a single window. Okay, so it looks like we did in fact have a threat extraction event. So potential malicious content extracted. It was a document file type, and we converted it to a PDF, and we see that the original name was a resume.doc as we expected. Now let's go and actually see what the victim would see if they were to retrieve that email now that it's gone through the threat extraction. Okay. So what we see here, I'll go ahead and pull the email up and expand it so we can see the whole thing. So from Joe Smith at unknown300.com to user 1, as we see that subject of the email that when we sent the email attachment. Now, as I mentioned, we are converting to PDF, so you see that this resume.doc was converted to a PDF file, which means basically what we did is we made we detected active content, so we took the file and basically used a PDF printer to print out a flat file. So any and all types of active content, hyperlinks, embedded objects, JavaScripts, all of it's gone, and we have just a flat image file. Now, the next piece you'll see, this email attachments for clean of potential threats by the checkpoint gateway. The user can click there. This is a configurable option. You can disable this so that users are not able to retrieve the original. But as I'll show you in a second, if they do choose to retrieve the original, we're actually going to run the emulation in the background. And then finally down here, you'll see email secured by checkpoint. This message, this one can be customized to say whatever the customer wants it to say. But let's open up the extracted or converted file and see what we see. So as you saw when we opened it up on the attacker side, that file ran some sort of command prompt in the background and did lots of nasty stuff, and then it also popped up a CryptoLocker acceptance window. Those are both very alarming things. Now we see that once the file has been converted, all of that active content's been stripped away, and now we have just the resume file. This is very, very useful for our HR departments that are looking at resumes all day long. Now you can deliver a clean file instantly to the HR department. They can open up the file, and you can rest assured there's no type of exploitable content in it. Now, if there is any type of active content, we want to make sure that it's still, we are still informed and we know what happened or what the active content was attempting to do. So if we actually open up here to get the original file, we confirm that the files are coming from a trusted source. I like malware. Let's go ahead and click OK and see what this file was trying to do. So it looks like it was actually blocked. And the reason it was blocked, let's go back to our event correlation here. Check and see what happened. So let's go to our critical events. And we'll see here this threat emulation. So the file was emulated in the background, and as we see, malicious activity was detected. It was a critical. It's high confidence, meaning it's definitely not a false positive. We know for sure this was malicious activity. So let's go over here and actually see what this file is trying to do. And let's check it against Windows 7. So we can save that report. Let's actually just open the report in a browser. Okay, so the first thing you'll see that we ran the simulation, this particular emulation on Windows 7 32-bit with Office 2003, that patch level, Office 2007, that patch level, and then Adobe Acrobat, Adobe Flash, and the Java version as well. You see the file name. We see that right at the top in bold red letters that malicious activity was detected, what type of the file was, who sent it, who received it, what the subject was, and then the file size and the hashes. Now, if there's a lab that the administrator has that they use for reverse engineering or further analysis, they can actually download the malicious file from here. This is not sent to the end user, so the end user will never be able to access the malicious file, one that has found to be malicious. With threat extraction, they can click the link to access an original file, but only if it's found to be non-malicious. So let's see what this file tried to do. So no suspicious activities. It didn't try to make any outbound calls. It didn't affect any register keys. But it did actually spawn a process, which looks like a legitimate Windows process. So it created the process and then terminated it, and then it affected a bunch of files here. Let's go down here and see what happened during the screenshots of the emulation process. So as you see there, the emulation happened, and just as we suspected or just as we saw when I opened the file up in the attacker, we got a CryptoLocker pop up. It's never a good thing. Let's go on down and see in detail what the activities were. So as I mentioned, it ran the rundll32.exe process. So it may have been attempting to use that to insert itself into the Windows registry or whatever. And then it actually changed, created, and modified some files. Command and control.txt, that's definitely going to throw up a red flag. ran some executables, and then some COM, Windows-based files. And then finally, what we're going to see is actually a timeline of the activity. What happened during what period of time in the emulation process. So we see that the emulation took around 18 seconds and several different activities. We created the process, terminated it, created a directory, wrote a bunch of files to it. So things that you wouldn't expect a document to do traditionally. So now that we've seen the report, we know that not only were we able to strip out the active content, but then we were able to see what the active content was trying to do in the back end. So that's all I had for the live demo, but thanks everybody for your time, and I will pass it back to Kat to close it up.
Again, thanks for your time. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us or our partner AccuData on this. Appreciate your time.